Right, lovely. Well, thank you to anyone that's joining us. I'm Jack Chew, and this is Dave O'Sullivan. And we had a bit of a skirmish, we could say, a couple of months ago on Twitter. And as is the better way of dealing with these things than silly social media, we thought we'd have a chat and clear the air. It's been a long time coming, mainly because of logistics, and I missed a planned meeting we had, so we weren't meaning to delay it quite as much as we have. We thought that a smart way of doing this would ideally just to live stream a conversation between us about clearing the air and how to move forward more maturely. However, we weren't able to work out exactly how to do it simultaneously. So I'm going to cast this into Physio Matters Facebook page, and then we'll give the recording over to Dave, and he's going to share that in his platforms just so that we get that out there to all audiences. In order to not bias it in favor of an audience, we're not going to do a Q&A. Whilst please feel free to share any comments, and we might come to those questions after the fact independently, but we're not going to cover those on here today because that won't be necessarily a representative feed. We're just going to have a chat between us for 45 minutes or so, and then hopefully just get through some bits and pieces. I think it'd be smart for us to introduce yourselves, Dave, to respective audiences. If you'd like to go first.
Yeah, cheers, Jack. So yeah, my background primarily is professional sport. So I was one that kind of went against all the advice and went straight into rugby league when I came out of uni. So I've got over 10 years in kind of professional sport, while also kind of growing a private practice alongside that. So that's very much my background. I've worked with various rugby league teams, rugby union teams over the years, and went back to Ireland and came back to the UK. My wife's from Huddersfield, so I had to come back, whether I like it or not, with the two kids now. But then I started to grow the private practice as well. Alongside that, then just had enough of the kind of the day-to-day professional sport in 2015, I think it was. So set up my mentorship on the back of that. Really had a lot of requests. And I'll be honest, I started it, I didn't really think it'd last, but it's as I said, for some strange reason we're still here 5 years later. So I split my time now between kind of mentoring or coaching physios, treating in sport and private practice, and obviously running the business as well keeps me busy.
Brilliant. My clinical background's pretty mixed. I did a combination of NHS and sport initially. Now it's more private practice, and we see sort of second opinion work off the back of having a podcast that ended up doing pretty well back when podcasts were niche. So we've had a show that we run as a monthly podcast, CPD podcast, called Physio Matters, on a monthly basis that goes out across many channels. And because of that, we have a private practice in South Manchester in which we see second opinion work, not dissimilarly in and around sort of sport, as is people that are often breaking your door down on a Monday morning are the ones that have injured themselves that weekend of various different flavours, but we see a mixed bag here. But generally, we are also, and relevant to this conversation, is we're sort of a online commentary on all things musculoskeletal issues. I also am the director of a think tank which sprung off some of the policy wing of Physio Matters, which is called MSK Reform, which is a think tank which is trying to reform public policy to the betterment of MSK and mainly MSK patients. So they're the hats that I wear at the moment. So I thought we've had a little chat about what sort of format might be smart for this chat and structure. We will be sort of hoping to get to some of the clinical issues as well that we were discussing. But above all else, it seems smart for us to start with the what happened. And so I thought if I just represent what I feel was the timeline of what went on, and certainly I want to present it without analysis as just as cleanly and accurately as I can, and then you just make sure you stop me if I'm missing anything or filling any gaps, Dave. Is that all right?
Yeah, sounds good, Matt.
I have what happened as far as I saw, and I won't put the dates up, but essentially a tweet was put out which was a screenshot, and I've got the image here of it was a screenshot of what looks like a video, but it was from a advert on Facebook, and this is a picture that was put up on Twitter, and I was tagged in, or I don't know if I personally was, but the Physio Matters podcast was tagged in this by a therapist who then was tweeting about this being basically, in a nutshell, physio, making a mockery of physio, essentially saying that this was as an exercise, a representative image of an exercise of which it didn't support. And what happened then was we, on the Physio Matters podcast account, we took that image or that tweet, retweeted it, and then ran like a spoof competition, essentially saying, what's this exercise for? Wrong answers only. And it was the context being that it was like, what a ridiculous position for someone to be in. Let's all laugh at this. Now, what then happened was it became clear from that people were joining in, posting their wrong answers and scoffing and laughing, but then also some people that then recognized that it was you and your clinic, tagged you in it, but also started to then jump to defense of not just that exercise, that style of practice, but also you and your clinic. And in doing so, a bit of a ruckus occurred whereby there was discussion about whether or not that exercise is up for ridicule. Then it became, well, is this even this is not a useful use of interprofessional discussion. And it sort of got heated. I mean, it all simmered down and it was a storm in a teacup over in 24 hours from what I recall, but it was certainly something that was of a relevant size and enough eyeballs had been on it for it to matter. You then did a podcast. That you've got a podcast called The Go-To Physio, and you did a podcast reflecting on that incident and talking a little bit about the influence in how that appears to the profession and to the public. Is this how we should be having a dialogue? Is this how we should be behaving? As well as then unpacking a little bit as to what that exercise what that image represents, etc. And so you did that podcast. Now, it was at that point of which, as a podcaster, I'm sitting in a studio we use on a regular basis, right? It just felt like, right, this is a moment in which we either end up talking past each other or about each other, whereby I offer a response to that show, and we never get, it just felt like that would be only silly to do that. Or instead, I'd certainly by that point started reflecting on mistakes that had been made and behaviour that we wanted to apologise for. But also then it felt like a conversation would be far better than you talking on your podcast into the ether, me talking on my podcast into the ether. It felt like that was a bit silly. So instead we're having this chat. Now, is there anything in that timeline before we get into the weeds of it that you feel have I missed anything or that isn't representative of what happened?
No, mate, I think that's pretty spot on.
So what was in that podcast then? Because we said we'll get to the actual the image, the exercise, etc., the styles of practice sort of conversation clinically. That's fine to talk about, but it's just that in that podcast, what you highlighted really was that you felt it was good evidence of a style of behaviour and an incident of which you feel is just detrimental fundamentally to the profession, to common decency and a variety of other things. So you just wondered what your thoughts were on that, and if you could unpack that for those that haven't listened.
Yeah, look, and I said that to you off air, Jack, as well, that when I'm talking about that style of behavior, I'm not necessarily saying you guys, because from what I could see, that was the first time I've seen you guys kind of do something like that. But I've seen a lot of people over the years on Twitter behave like that, where it's I'm right, you're wrong. And essentially it comes down to just trying to beat people down. And I mean, we still get it now. It's like, because we put stuff out there, it's like people just comment and they're just trying to, just essentially beat people down. And I just think, well, unless you actually, that's fine to disagree, but actually, unless you're going to add value to the conversation, then, certainly I've got no interest in having a conversation with anyone who just wants to, to prove me wrong, because ultimately I don't have all the answers, and I'd never for a second say that I do have all the answers. And I think the big thing that people kind of miss or forget is that when someone puts something out there, they genuinely have a belief that, this is probably what's happening. And as I said in my podcast, I've made loads of mistakes, and I've said, I've told patients I'm releasing scar tissue and all this stuff. And it's shows like yourself and all the other various bits like Greg Laban stuff that, you get there and you go, shit, that's great, that, and I can kind of correct what I'm saying. So I think there's a certain point in a therapist's journey where they may be at, where they actually believe that stuff to be true. And as I said, and I believe, certain things are happening, but as I said, I'm not afraid to be wrong. But I think if we, just see something on social media and that therapist has put themselves out there to the world and we just start bashing them down, I think that could really be detrimental to a therapist's confidence. And as I said, in a way, I'm glad it happened to me because I'm used to this stuff. You see the emails we get, people signing up for our stuff and then replying and like, get me off your fucking email list and all this stuff. And, so I'm well used to it. And I think it was more the fact that whole incident was more the fact that people were messaging me and contacting me and stuff. And I was like, geez, like, calm down a bit here. I'm well used to it, as I'm sure you guys are when you put stuff out there. But I think if that happened to another therapist, I think that's dangerous, really, where we could really knock someone's confidence. And I get, at the same time, I get, that we have a responsibility and we need to challenge stuff, and I get that. But I feel that things are slipping a certain way, and it's become more and more common. And it's the louder and the more controversial we are. Obviously, it's great for marketing, and we get eyeballs, we get retweets, and Twitter loves it because they're gonna, spread it, get the reach more, and that's all great. But I think at the end of the day, our job as therapists is ultimately and especially as physios, like we should be leading by example, really, rather than, because it's happening in all walks, not just the physio profession, obviously, but in all walks of online. I think it's dangerous.
Sure. I think one of the things that I felt was worth, when I think about the things when I was listening to the podcast, of which there was plenty to agree with and plenty for me to reflect on what we'd done, but there were certain things where it was described, and by, I totally accept that you're not you admitted throughout that podcast, and I totally agree. And off air, we've just talked about it. You're not trying to infer that this has mortally wounded you in any which way. You're just reflecting on the fact that someone else being in this crossfire would potentially be vulnerable to. And I think we'll come to that. But it was that you had mentioned that you felt that people had been contacting you and stuff, and you had said that on reflection, this is something that you would consider to be bullying. And that was something that was reflected in that podcast. Now, one of the things I wanted to clarify is that when something like that happens, a lot of the perception at the time from you, as well as what seems to be reflected in the podcast, as well as some of your audience, is that these are personal attacks, when it was actually some of your followers or someone that's recognized it, that's then attached you and your clinic and your practice to something that was being mocked, but it was being mocked as an arbitrary photograph, an exercise.
Yeah.
And so I know that might still feel like it's, it's in a personal level, you and people that know are naturally going to instinctively attach that to you. But I feel that there is a relevant distinction between scoffing and ridiculing and mocking people and mocking photographs or styles of practice or exercises that in that instance, whilst it was being ridiculed in the first instance, wasn't attached to a person, and we've never interacted before, and I'm not doing so at that point, or any of my team recognizing that was attached to a person. We kind of always know that someone's done it, someone's prescribed it, right? Someone's posted it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I felt like that's a relevant thing, that this wasn't a personal thing. And do you think that that's a fair?
Yeah,
fair
no,
point?
I 100% accept that. And to be fair, I think my main issue with that really is that the therapist presumably knows who I am because he's down the road from me, and our logo. Now, to be fair to me, messaged me, he said, "Look, I didn't realize your logo was on the balloon," but that logo, it's pretty prominent in a lot of our stuff. And I think if the logo wasn't there, I don't think it'd be a massive issue, if I'm being honest. I think that's probably why I felt it. But I get that if it's just an image and it's not got, it's got none of my branding on it and stuff like that, then there's absolutely no issue. And I think it's more, I think what I was alluding to there was, again, it's where you're taking an image from one platform, which is Instagram, to then, go on to Twitter to then tag other people in it and laugh at it when, and as I said, I accept that Chris didn't, he didn't realize my logo was on the balloon, which is fair enough. I accept that. So yeah, no, look, I completely get it. I'm not necessarily saying this incident, I didn't feel particularly like I was bullied, but I think that kind of behavior where it's right, let's all look at this and laugh at it, you know, someone's going to see that, and they're not going to feel good, are they, when, you know, when that's happening. So yeah, no, but I completely accept what you're saying there, and, you know, and I didn't particularly feel bullied in that situation, but I think that behavior, it could easily be seen as that. So yeah, sure. Hopefully if that clarifies it.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's fair enough. I think in the podcast you unpack an analogy whereby you felt it was an example you gave was that it was a kid doing the drawing at school and stuff. Do you mind just sharing that?
Yeah, sorry, I can barely remember. That was a few months ago, but I think it said, yeah, someone done a drawing or a piece of work, and then you know, they put it on whatever the desk, and then another kid took that piece of drawing and went over to his mates and just said, "Oh, look at this silly work," you know, and you know, starts laughing at it, and then another kid takes it and shares it to 20,000 of his mates. That was kind of the analogy, I suppose, I was going with that. But yeah, I mean, I accept your point on the other side of it, where, you know, to you it's just an image, it's not personal, and I get that.
Now, one of the things that I want to make sure I'm clear on as well, and it's definitely, this is the thing that needs to be apologized for. Once it's attached to a person and to a clinic, and that a discussion has occurred in which it's clearly that there becomes sides get taken, right? It gets defended, and then it's being ridiculed or it's being discussed. Is that that was something that we didn't deal with that well at all, and there is a blood sport to it, and you get carried away. And in instances like that, when it gets personalized, even though it wasn't us that did so, there's only half an excuse there, because once it's personal, you know, there's an easy way to sort of temper that down, and we didn't do that. I didn't do that. But one of the things that I wanted to, I suppose, ask after really for what the reflections are, that this doesn't look good. It's just public, as well as it not being good into professional discourse for people to learn. But it was just that when the stuff is out there, and in this instance, since then, partly because of Googling you, etc., means that I'm getting target marketed with some of your mentorship.
I was going to say, I know that doesn't like me, but do not click on my website. So yeah, if any of your listeners don't like me, mate, don't click on my website.
No, it's all right. Excuse me. Sorry. But yeah, since then, it's just that image has naturally followed me about a bit. Now, the reason I mention that is because the thing that I wonder about, and I've wondered myself, because, you know, I've ended up getting caught in, I've been on all different sides of those sorts of spats. And it feels like that when stuff like that is out there, and it's attached to, in your instance, a accomplished physio that's naturally and understandably and rightfully so, leveraging your reputation and your experience and your expertise to sell your mentoring products under that as being a part of your practice is, and you're using that image and other things, and a discussion and a blog and things to sell products. I'm totally understanding that is all legit, but it's just that when the analogy used is a kid at school having their drawing ridiculed, I suppose I want to ask as to, I don't know if you can be both those people. I don't think you can be the person that's sort of championing their expertise and being positioned as such as a completely valid marketing exercise. So I think the analogy is actually better suited to it being the head teacher of a school highlighting what they feel is particularly good work, then being put out there to advertise said school for monetary gain. If that's then being ridiculed, the context is quite different. And it just feels like, I don't think it was purposeful, but it's just that does feel like trying to have your cake and eat it too, in a sense, because it's like you can't be an expert when you get plaudits, but then also a vulnerable school child when being mocked. And it felt like maybe trying to have it both ways there.
No, I don't think necessarily. I don't mind being challenged. I think it's the way I was challenged that I didn't particularly like there. As I said, I think the big thing there is I'll use that image, but we'll split test a lot of images that we use, but it's the copy. Like I generally believe that what we're writing in the copy is what I think is happening. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that, you know, I'm trying to have, you know, having my cake and eat it and feel wounded and stuff like that. Because I said I don't particularly feel wounded, you know, and it's a case of, you know, the images there. He's a world-class athlete. I feel privileged to work with him. I'm proud of working with him. We use a whole host of different exercises. and ultimately that's the one that you're probably getting, that's following you around, because it's an image that I didn't particularly like using. The marketing team were like, I was like, oh, look, people are going to think we're doing PRI, because I could see that through some of the comments that were coming through. I was like, I think we should take it down. It's their best performing image. It's the cheapest clicks that we're getting on Facebook. So I was like, all right, you do what you need to do. And as I said, I don't, there's a lot of assumptions being made. It's like people, it's a PR exercise. I definitely got it from PRI, but at the same time, it's an image. It's a world-class athlete. I'm proud to work with him, so we'll use it. But as I said, look, I don't think particularly in my instance I felt bullied, as I said, but I think that kind of behavior, that's probably what I was alluding to, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying, and I don't want, like, as I said, it's 2 months now, but I didn't particularly feel, bullied or, oh my God, like this and this. It was more just, I think that I was more talking about that kind of behavior and trend that's going on Twitter, not necessarily, our situation.
I think that because that's the thing where I really do agree with you. And I also agree that Twitter has peaks and troughs, really, with regards to how hostile an environment it sometimes feels. And I think that we've been sometimes on the right side of that and sometimes on the wrong side of it. In this instance, we were on the wrong side of it. And I would say that I think that the increase of the amount of patients that use Twitter to converse about MSK issues and students is just growing. It's generally speaking, I think there's a majority, because there's such a majority of camaraderie, and if anything, it's something that we can get guilty of being swept up in sort of sycophantic behavior where there's a lot more backpatting goes on. So therefore, occasionally it does mean that when things like that happen, where it's a bit more hostile, a bit more spicy, then it sometimes can actually be the juxtaposition to usual that sort of highlights it. But one of the things is that behavior, I agree, but it's that when that behavior is targeted to you or I, or people that have got a platform in which they're sharing their ideas and positioning themselves with some expertise, then it's when thinking, what if a new graduate, or what if a student, or someone that was sort of like the equivalent of a kid holding their own work up, it's like, well, yeah, that'd be really bad behavior. I mean, it'd be such a dick move that I can't really conceive of it. And I also haven't seen it. Whereas it was sort of sometimes gets inferred, not just by you in this instance, but people sort of say as if that people throwing something out there get trampled on. A new graduate says, oh, I just, I did some mobilizations today, really interested, that they get like ridiculed. And I just don't see it that way.
Yeah, I suppose I see a lot of, people saying, like, posting exercises and maybe saying stuff. And then you'll see comments of people, just questioning them and all this. And some of them are new grads, because, we'll follow a lot of them on our space. So I think, I certainly seen evidence of that in the past where, people are saying stuff and, they may not be quite right. And I'd probably cringe sometimes when I see what they're writing, but it's a bit like, what, they're trying to do their best. And, as I said, like some of my sports therapists, they'll write blogs, and one or two have slipped out through the net and they've been put out there before. I'm just like, fuck it, you're way off here with what you're saying. And, I just think we don't know all the facts, I suppose, sometimes in terms of, when we come across stuff.
Yeah, when you never know the whole context sometimes, do you? When I realize when stuff like that happens, one of the reasons I think it can sometimes occur is that everyone curates their own social media feed, so no one's seeing what you're seeing in the frequency, or that no one follows the same amounts of people and the same types of accounts and stuff. And so people think that physio Twitter or healthcare MSK Twitter or whatever, or the social media landscape across different platforms that most people are on, 2 or 3, they sometimes think that the world or their part of the bubble is seeing what they're seeing. And so you curate your own news in a way through social media. And so sometimes I think people make that mistake, and I think I've been guilty of that before. But also, one of the things that I'll admit with this is that you admittedly, quickly into an exchange, got lumped in with some similar dramas from yesteryear. So me and Kelly Starrett had a back and forth years ago about, essentially, it's the inference that your biomechanics are your destiny, and that fundamentally that there are sort of a chain-based approach or fundamental movement screen and correction approach to care is central to it, and that outside of it, is, both sides feeling like the other's talking nonsense. And so it just feels like when we've had those sorts of back and forths, it's usually like, this is stupid, we're going to laugh at this. And then the response is usually, and this is where you were wrongly lumped in, was the response from that fraternity is usually like, the evidence doesn't understand me. You're just not, you're not there yet. We look like mavericks to you, but that's just because we're 2 years ahead of the trend. Get over yourselves. And, you keep reading your literature. We're actually going to crack on and do things. Now, admittedly, I was lumping you in a little bit with that fraternity, which just I'm sick of talking to. There's no lack of trying over the years, but fundamentally, there's just a difference in heuristic philosophy, right? It just seems that we're really trying to do this and trying to be evidence informed, and all the difficulties that brings. And then there's another fraternity, especially attached to sport and fitness, that can sometimes dine out on gadgets and gizmos. And it felt like, and wrongly so, I admit and apologize, you were, when I admit as to why it kicked off so quickly and why we were badly behaved and why I was badly behaved, was partly because of the fact that we were like lumping you in a little bit with them, and it was unfairly so. So again, I do apologize for that. But it's why our sensitivities, our bullshit sensors are a bit primed, is because we've had those encounters before.
Yeah, I completely get that, man. I knew that as well. So as I said, there's no dramas with that. And I think, I think it is a good point. And what I try to do, and what I think is useful for us to do, is to stuff with the balloons and stuff is really try to get people to understand, or understand why these things might be helping people, because as you said, it's not just a biomechanical view. It's the human body's complex. The human body with pain is another level. So it's trying to, I think it's trying to control the therapist, and that's a big part of what I do on a day-to-day basis with my therapist, Simon Menchip, is control them getting carried away with themselves when they get these quick wins, because that to me is it's almost a virus in itself now, where you can do something and get a quick change, and therapists get this this wow, the patient calls them a Houdini, and they get addicted to that, and I'm sick shit of that, to be honest with you, because in professional sport there's nowhere to hide, and you can have a player feeling great getting off the bed, but he goes out onto the training pitch. If you don't do your job right, you're going to get you're going to get found out pretty quickly. So I think what I'm trying to do is, with all this diaphragm stuff, is like, let's just like keep it simple and see why this stuff is happening. And I get, like, obviously there you have to grab someone's attention, and there has to be that little bit of uniqueness about it, and intrigue, obviously, to get someone in. But what I try to do with that PDF is go, well, look, here's what I think is happening. The diaphragm's moving. It's going to affect the rib cage. It's going to affect the pelvis. It's probably going to change bits and pieces. Put in a bit of evidence here and there with it, and try not to get therapists carried away. And that's what I'm about, really. And I think hands-on is useful, but I think we get too carried away with hands-on. So I think hands-on has its place. But I also think it's more important to be able to build that resilience and have confidence in the rehab exercise you're using, and not just particularly that rehab exercise.
I think if we can, Dave, I'll just pull the picture back up. Just those that have only just joined us, we did have this up earlier just to give the context. But this is, if you can just talk us through. I mean, as I've said before, it doesn't need to be telling us this exact case, but just if you can talk us through what's going on there, because I don't want to pretend that there isn't a. Now that we're talking clinical, we can sort of unpack this for a little bit as to where there might be some clinical disagreement and be more appropriate and mature about it this time, admittedly. But what's going on here?
Yeah, so he's at this stage now. He's not in pain at this stage. It's more, the PRI stuff. I've studied it. Some of the stuff I think, all right, I don't particularly agree with some of the stuff, or
that's the
Posture Restoration Institute. Yeah. So I've seen this exercise originally through them,
right,
where again, and that's why I don't like using the exercise particularly on our advertising, but our marketing team are, well, it's the cheapest click. So, they want to use it. But what I was doing here with him is, like, for me, his golf coach said, right, he's not getting into his left leg, he's not loading his left hip on the follow through, he's arching his back, which he's got a history of that, which you'll see in the press. So Now what you don't see here is we've worked him up to standing. We're putting a bit of load through his left leg. Now the PRA will cue him to push on his heel. I want him on his midfoot, just to create some kind of perturbation. We're going to put a band around his leg, because in the golf swing on the way down, his right glute max needs to be pushing him into his left hip essentially on the downswing. Get his internal obliques essentially to contract. So if we can get his internal obliques to contract and get his rib cage to retract, then he's not going to extend his back. So what I'll do with these exercises, I'll put him in this position, give him the sensory awareness of being on the left leg. As I said in my response, balloons, I use them sometimes. I might use humming. I might use nasal breathing just to try dampen down the system while his leg is taking load essentially. But straight after that, and obviously what you don't see on Twitter is straight after this exercise, I will do a movement with him where he has to get onto that left leg very, very quickly and try accept load. And as I said, what I think is happening here is I think I'm putting him in a position where his brain is shitting itself, which you may tell me different here. And I'm going, right, just breathe, relax, take a bit of load through it, and then we'll build them up through the more dynamic stuff as well. So I think it's got a use of an exercise. I don't for 1 second think it's the be all and end all. I don't think it's gonna fix his downswing, but I used it as a piece of the puzzle to try get a bit of load through his left leg, try get his internal obliques take a little bit, and try get him into his left leg a little bit before I put him into a more dynamic situation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes me, because a lot was made of the balloon thing, but it's more that I think one of the reasons why it felt to qualify for some ridicule was because it especially without context, but I would say even when it's explained, it sort of just feels like the standing on one leg, the position is in the balloon, and then the band round. It just felt like there was so much specificity there that it just felt like, what apart from for training for something that encounters something like that. So people were sort of as part of their scoffing and frolicking, they were sort of describing, oh, is he in the circus and things like that. It's just that it just feels like with something like that, and the reason why, I can especially when you're describing these being when they don't have symptoms, and athletes, you try and almost make a change that's going to assist performance and things. You've got to be far more creative. So I totally agree with that. But it's just that the way in which that complexity, that in this instance, just the three things: standing on one leg in that stoop position with a band around your ankles, using a balloon, means that image, even when unpacked and explained, it just seems that there's a number of ways to skin a cat. And it doesn't sound like you disagree with that, but that just seems a complex way of skinning a cat. And it just feels that part of that is that how much of it is performative and how much is it for us and how much is it for the patient? Does it need to be that novel for the patient to comply? And is that one of the core reasons for using a technique like that? Because it's something that in an elite sport environment, you're needing to do something different.
No, I think as I can completely see where you're coming from here. I think, anyone that knows me and see how I treat now, I think if anything, I'm going really back to basics. But I get, how you don't need to make it that complex. And a big thing for me this year is in my mentorship coach program is let's keep things simple. But as I said, I think in those situations, in the golfing situations, there's it is a bit of a unique kind of I suppose movement. His other foot is on the wall. Putting the band around him is going to challenge him in the transverse frontal plane. It's going to create a lot of chaos. He's an athlete. He's a very talented athlete. He'll figure that out. If you do that with somebody who's not strong enough to go into that position, it's going to be a complete train wreck. So I think for me it's using that exercise at the right time when he's actually earned the right to get there. That's when I would consider using that exercise. But I think what you don't see is what he's done to get there, to be able to get into that position. And I completely agree. You may not use that exercise. You may use a different exercise. And at the end of the day, that's the beauty of our profession, is that you can go and treat one way, and I can treat another way, and we'll probably get to the same point. Now, we need to be very careful, I get that, about what we're saying to patients and how patients are getting reliant, whether it's our hands or the exercise, or that kind of reliance. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, an exercise gets me from A to B. And that exercise, what that allowed me to do with him then was get him into a more dynamic situation where his brain, his nervous system, whatever it is feeling a little bit safer to take a bit of load through that leg in a more higher speed of movement, which ultimately the downswing is going to be a lot more kind of fast and a lot more going on. So it's not an exercise to solve the problem, but it's a little piece of the puzzle that ultimately I built up to try solve a problem that his coach wanted to solve.
I think that the bit where I remember it a bit from Twitter. It's just come back to me and stuff, and I know on DMs and that you've said it here again and on the podcast, is that I like to keep things simple, and it's just that I sort of totally believe that you're saying that with sincerity, but it's just that a simpler thing than band balloon one leg is no band no balloon, and if someone can get the outcome in a circumstance like that. So what you're describing is something that's offering a novel take and a disruption that would challenge someone enough to then move them into a dynamic and more functionally relevant position after the fact. It's just that whether, obviously the language used is really relevant. So if you're suggesting that this isn't about spelling out to the patient about exactly this is how you're correcting these faults and stuff, which is promising.
No,
it's less biomechanical than maybe my instincts would suggest. But even so, the activation pattern that's being described, it just feels so specific that if you can get that outcome without bells and whistles, and the specificity, the athlete, unless you're admitting to them, which would spoil the illusion, unless you're admitting to them that this is just my attempt to scramble the nervous system. I forget the language you used, but it was like, I see the logic there, but it's just that the athlete's going to assume that the specificity is relevant, and that this activation pattern is super relevant, and one of only a few ways of actually getting those outcomes. And it just feels like that specificity is where I think our instincts are different, and that, yeah, we can all treat differently. I suppose it's just that if one of those different treatment styles is one that doesn't, I think that where possible, I always say treat specific things specifically and general things generally. And people make the mistake if they get that the wrong way around. But it just feels in this instance, I don't know the clinical context enough at all to know whether it could be any less specific than that. But it's just that, especially as a snapshot moment, it just feels especially complicated for, even when hearing its context. It just, I don't know. But then I don't know the athlete. We will be associated a bit with these balloons, I'm afraid, though, pal, because that was a tweet that got sent out that, admittedly, some bad behavior from us there. But then I've had these adverts that have come up on Facebook and Insta. But then also, it reminded one of my team to say, well, there was like a clip video from Therapy Expo of which they were chuffing on balloons and stuff. It's just that there's 3 occasions in which I've come across your work in say, last 12 months. I haven't put them all together until now, but it's kind of, they're all balloon related. So I suppose one of the reasons why you might be painted that way, and I'm not meaning to, but it's just that it's promising to say that you don't use them a lot, but it's just that if you're always associated by that from a public thing, then I suppose that's one of the reasons why you might feel unfairly associated to gimmicks.
No, yeah, look, I've got no issues if I'm associated with balloons. I don't think that's a big deal, to be fair. And I'll stand by balloons, and I don't necessarily use balloons in that position a whole lot with with back pain patients, but I use balloons, to get the rib cage moving and to mobilize it. So I use balloons in various positions. So I've got no issues, or I'm not cringing that the fact that someone associates me with a balloon. A balloon's a tool to ultimately to help us, and I think it's a good tool, and it gives a patient something to do. And I completely agree with what you're saying about I've got a responsibility not to say to the patient, this balloon is doing X, Y, and Z, but it's a nice, easy action for a patient to do that can ultimately, it can change their state pretty quickly. And as I said, I've got absolutely no issues being associated with balloons. I probably want the one thing that, I I don't want to, which again, that I accept that image is a PRA exercise, is I don't want people to think, oh, he's just doing PRA, you know, and that's the thing, I suppose, that would bother me, you know, being respectful to PRA as well. But I completely accept I have to wear the hat because, you know, you're using exercise that I've seen off PRA. So I'm absolutely fine with that. But in terms of using a balloon, I've got absolutely no dramas, you know, being associated with using balloons, but I use a balloon to mobilize the rib cage to help me get to where I am. And, you know, my approach is let's just get everything moving. Let's give back the body what it once had, so to speak. And ultimately, let's see what's left over. And that's on the back of working in professional sport where, you know, pathology is present. We know pathology is present. Yeah, you know, we see players functioning very, very highly. And I don't believe in, you know, the symptoms or the pathology is the biggest thing. For me, it's right, let's undo all of these things and see what's left over. And that's what I mean by keeping things simple. And, you know, for me, it's like, you know, that balloon breathe, humming, all of that stuff, you know, they're very, very great, good ways to control the mind, because the mind controls the body, but the breath controls the mind, so to speak. So again, that's probably too simplistic. So I think all of these things are good if without getting carried away. And I think that, you know, I can completely see your point of view is people get carried away with this stuff and they can go down rabbit holes as well. And, you know, and I think, you know, I probably feel a bit responsible from that in the past. And my Talking Therapy Expo is very much, let's get that diaphragm moving through a prolonged exhalation. Let's get the rib cage moving. Let's get all of these things undone, because when a back pain patient, the first thing they'll usually do when they move is they'll hold their breath. Let's break up all of these things and see what's left over. But I'm not for a second saying your diaphragm has to be in this perfect position or your rib cage has to be in this position. You know, far from it. So I think the balloons I'm okay with. Associated me with you know, saying this is the only way I treat, I think I'd have an issue with that.
Sure, no, and I think that's fair, certainly, because you made clear from the off that that it's not that there's any sort of algorithmic style of practice that you would narrowly treat to, and that the balloon is part of that algorithm. There's a thing on this advert that comes through with that image whereby it says about how you often get asked, if there was one thing I could have learned in my career, what would it be? And you said that this is it. And what you're referring to in this particular post is this association between breathing dysfunction, back pain, hamstring tension, the glutes and the pelvic floor working well with the diaphragm. You feel that is a, you know, of your search, you feel that especially with in this instance persistent back pain, you feel that is a real key thing that people overlook.
Yeah, I wouldn't say breathing dysfunction. I don't like that term, but I think the breathing strategies people use in back pain, and I think the ability to actually change that and prolong the exhalation and get the rib cage moving, I think is massive, because we can see, and there is research out there that's showing that how the trunk moves is going to affect how the peripheral tissues are going to react. So for me, I think it's important that we get that rib cage moving, because there's going to be a whole host of things that's going to happen, that's going to be beneficial to the patient. And you know, the breathing work, it's absolutely so easy to implement, and when a patient is focusing on the breath, they're in the present moment, you know. And I think that's very, very important with someone who is catastrophizing. You can give them a simple action where they focus on the air as it comes through the nose, slow the air down, and instantaneously you can change their state, and we get great results with that. Mentorship therapists get great results with that. We can get them humming, we can prolong the exhalation, we can do all of these great things. And, you know, that is, for me, it's absolutely 100% the thing that I wish I knew earlier, because as I said, in a World Cup final week, that's a tool that I have that can calm that player down. And it's an action that he can do that's so simple. And again, you don't need a balloon. You can hum, you can nasal breathe, you can count to 10, whatever you can do. So yeah, I would stand by that.
Because I think, you know, I think it probably would meet, when I think about some of the go-to tip would be breathing related. If I had to name my top 10 things with regards to back pain patients that walk in, persistent or otherwise, it'd be the fact that their breath holding and the fact that tension that comes through often a perception that they need to be bracing, etc., is something that increasingly does emerge in the evidence. I suppose it's the specificity of activation and the way in which that I think the mechanism of effect of the things that it doesn't sound like, you're doing something to try and regulate breathing and try and uncouple it related behaviors that would affect someone's function and their output. And especially in clinic, you're absolutely, I totally agree. You're getting someone to regulate the breathing, even just cueing them to not hold their breath, poking them when they do so, make sure they're talking to you, or getting them singing or humming, etc. And then balloons, it's not a far extension from that. But it's just that the mechanism of effect of that intervention, I just think is actually even simpler. I know you said you like simplicity, but I just think the mechanism of effect of stopping someone holding their breath, I don't actually think that the particular, if we had that ability to scan someone, I don't think it matters as their position of the diaphragm or exactly how it's interacting with an activation pattern with the obliques and the glutes, etc. It's that the actual, it's not the intervention that seems to be a difference between us here at all. But admittedly, there does seem to be what that seems to infer, like what is causing the benefit. I think the mechanism of effect of the intervention is actually even simpler, and that to infer that it's something that is an activation pattern or even a nominally biomechanical or neurobiomechanical thing, I just think it just feels like that's where it gets a bit more particular. But the particulars are one of the things that it feels like sells.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What do you mean by activation patterns?
So with regards to the points that are made in particularly the blog that I've tried to understand your approach, the copy that's attached to that, as well as what you've explained with regards to when you justified that exercise on Twitter that day, was about the pelvic floor, the diaphragm dominant flattening, extending, and you were then you were suggesting that the obliques and the glutes being related to that and allowing the hamstrings to relax is something that is related directly to the breathing exercises, and that is what is seeming to decrease that person's symptoms.
Yeah, so sorry, I wouldn't necessarily say there's a magic activation or pattern. All I'm saying in that post is let's get the diaphragm lengthening to ultimately allow the internal obliques or whatever it is, that their length-tension relationship will be affected by the ribcage mobility. So let's get that moving and see. But I'm very against trying to recruit in isolation or having this perfect activation. For me, it's let's get these things moving and see what's left over. Get the rib cage moving through, an ideal full range, whatever that is. And then, if you do that, you're going to have a back that can relax. You're going to have an obliques that can fire. Happy days, whatever that means. And then let's get some load on the legs and the arms. So for me, it's let's undo all these rigidities and these strategies that people are using, and then ultimately let's get some load through the peripheral joints, because that to me seems to be the thing that they all need, is they need to get that load through the legs, less through the back now, and ultimately relax the back from what I'm seeing with a lot of my patients.
Yeah, I think that what seems to be happening is that when you start speaking an anatomical or nominally biomechanical language, it's that it feels that, admittedly, I and others are retrofitting some opinions there that maybe aren't there, but it's just that why not therefore just say that by regulating your breathing, you can relax and move more comfortably. It's just that for me is actual simplicity, because the anatomical language is like unless it was relevant. That's why I was assuming that you were thinking that there might be an activation pattern that's relevant.
Yeah, I get you. And I wouldn't even say it. I think it's a lot. I don't think it's as simple as regulating your breathing, because obviously when we're in environments, your limbic system is going to kick in outside of, higher center controls and stuff. And I think a lot of it's probably not as simple as regulating your breathing, what we're doing there. I think a lot of it's taking them into ranges again, or just getting that mobility back that they've probably lost. And I think that's where the prolonged exhalations is particularly useful, where we can actually get, because from my experience of doing this stuff, when I exhale for a long time, you get that panicky feeling, and then you slow down the inhale, then we exhale again, we desensitize that feeling. So again, whether that's chemoreceptors or whatever else is driving that, there's an opportunity to sensitize, you know, that feeling or whatever it is. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's just a case of, you know, regulating the breathing. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I think that was a misspeak, I suppose, because you're talking the language of sort of what's it called, symptom modification of a sort, and so it's a change, it's a relevant change in breathing style, etc. So yeah, I wasn't just meaning to calm the breathing, but I suppose it was just that change. It's just as soon as we're making that movement into, I think that's one of the reasons why me and others have made the assumption to you being I'm just not used to hearing that level of anatomical language if it's not then considered to be causally relevant, or, you know, it's like, well, why be mentioning even muscle groups if we're not thinking that their interaction or activation patterns are somehow relevant to symptomology, which just feels like, and especially when you're referencing Paul Hodges and the like in that blog post, it's just that that it's difficult for me, apart from this conversation, which has been enlightening, to uncouple you or that logic from a fairly, you know, from Hodges's work of, which is very much dysfunction, biomechanical dysfunction, and ups and downstream of that biomechanical dysfunction is pain, of which is essentially just new age structuralism. And it's just that what you're describing isn't that. It's just that to divorce it from that logic is something that is hard to do, and without this conversation, because of the anatomical and biomechanical language, I admit.
Yeah. Look, I get that, but I completely see that, and you know, and as I said, people will fucking hammer me on comments all the time with this stuff. So it won't be the last. But I think for me, where I stand is, you know, I think I still think the peripheral tissues are important. I don't think they're the be all and end all. But you know, so for me, it's just trying to get that balanced approach. Really, I think, you know, you've obviously got some people who think they're not that important, and others who are probably over emphasizing. But for me, I think I'm probably somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah, it only takes for someone that thinks that everything's centrally driven to develop a stress fracture for them to change their mind. That's what I always say. So I totally agree with you. People get carried away. And in this instance, apologies again, we got carried away on a theme, especially with regards to thinking that was something that was mock-worthy, and it was some behaviour there that we're not proud of. So I do apologise again for that. Thank you so much for your time. I know you get yourself off and get your kids to bed. So I know we said 10 to. I'm sorry I missed the clock.
No,
really appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to clear the air here, and also just, you know, note to people that this is the sort of thing where it definitely doesn't need to end in a spat. Let's tidy things up and move forward together.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers, Jack.
Nice one. All the best then. Take care.
See you, man.
Cheers.